he titles it "Taming the Beast," and he uses an analogy of Dr. Frankenstein. And with Halloween not too far behind us, I think that's a pretty good image. You know, Frankenstein was a genius, and he brought, you know, he brought his creation to life through determination and different things. And he is using that to compare that to a business and how we do the same thing, that from nothing, we were able to create something. And on the one hand, it could be a beautiful thing, a great thing, but as we know in the story of Frankenstein, that unchecked, that creation can also cause a lot of destruction. Just like in the introduction that he was explaining it did to him. On, what is this, page 14, he says, stitching together a business with nothing but a great idea, your unique talents, and whatever few resources you have at hand is most certainly a miracle. And it feels like one too, until the day you realize your business has become a giant, scary, soul-sucking, cash-eating monster. That's the day you discover that you too are an esteemed member of the Frankenstein family. So he makes that really explicit right there. On page 16, just looking at my annotations. Well, I guess if you step back a little bit, like if you've read the first 3 chapters, and you know, I think Cheryl would probably be a lot better with this. This is kind of like your business through the lens of accounting. And he's talking about growth as being half of the equation, but that seems to be the aspect that most entrepreneurs or business owners tend to focus on, is the growth. But he comments that growth is only half of the equation. And then he gives the story on the bottom of 16. He goes, I'll never forget meeting the owner of a $15 million company who furnished his house with plastic lawn furniture because he couldn't afford the real stuff. What does it say when the leader of a multi-million-dollar company can't even swing a trip to IKEA? It would make anyone question his true wealth and the wealth and health of his business. And then he talks about how a business should serve you. And when I was reading that section, it made me think of E-Myth Revisited. And that was one of the key takeaways that I had from Gerber, was that you have to create a vision of your business, like you're doing backwards planning, and keeping in mind the whole time that the whole goal is for that business to serve you, not for you to become trapped by the business. And then the next section is, it's titled Check to Check and Panic to Panic. He refers to it as bank balance accounting. On the bottom of 17, he goes, you look at your balance, your bank balance, and see a chunk of change. Yippee, you feel great for about 10 minutes, then you decide to pay all the bills that have been piling up. The balance goes to zero, and very quickly you feel that the all too familiar tightening in the chest as your throat dries up. And then moving on to the next page, he talks about the recency effect. And I think this is definitely relevant. I see this in the group, and I see this, I'm guilty of this too. The recency effect on the middle of page 18, he goes, it's a psychological phenomenon in which we humans, that's you by the way, plays a disproportionate significance on what we experienced most recently. For example, if I ask you to recall the last few words I wrote, you will easily recall the sentence, the most recent, but good luck remembering 2 sentences ago. And I think with eBay and with sales, that's what we do. Like, we see these posts all the time. How were your sales today? How were your sales this weekend? And I know tech is constantly just keeps preaching the same message, you know, trust the process, get your quality listings up, and there will be fluctuations, but, and also you can see this with feedback, right? Like you can be at 99.9% or 100% positive feedback, but you probably can't remember any of the positive feedback. But when you get one negative feedback, that's what you know, and that's what you remember. And I think those are examples of the recency effect. Recent stuff is the big stuff. All the other stuff becomes a waning memory. How does the recency effect apply to your finances? If you deposit lots of money today, you will probably feel great. The outlook for your business will appear to be good and all will seem well. And I think that's the heart of it, right? That's probably why when we have a slow sales day that we freak out, because, you know, because of the recency effect, that's what we're focused on. We're not looking at the big picture. We're focused on that short term. And then he kind of tells this picture of, it moves on to the survival trap on page 19. Says we use the money we have to pay the bills we owe. When we don't have enough to cover everything, we try to get more money through sales and collections, except that to support new revenue, we now have a host of new related expenses. So the cycle starts all over again. If you haven't relied on it from the start, eventually the only solution is to take on debt. This is how many entrepreneurs end up operating their businesses check to check and panic to panic. And then he talks about the survival trap, which I thought was really good. On page 20 and 21, he has a diagram of like point A is the crisis and point B is the vision. And once again, this kind of goes back to E-Myth Revisited. Like if you don't have a vision of what your business is and what you're trying to achieve, whenever you have a crisis, all these other things may happen, right? You may take on an unfit project to cover this month's payroll. And I think about this as far as reselling, right? Like we talk about niching down. Once you've kind of figured out where your opportunities lie for reselling, what items you can source that are profitable, what advantages you have, that you should niche down. And that would be more of the vision, which is the point B. But if your sales aren't doing well, then maybe you take on an unfit project. Maybe you try to sell something, or as we say, squirrel brain. You try to pick up a bike that you don't know anything about. And here's the other things you might want to cover this month.
The thing about that, Brian, is that bike makes sense when you're picking it up. Like, and it's not always a bike, but it's always that other thing. It's like, mathematically it makes sense. Like if I buy this bike for $100, I can sell it for $700, and only thing I gotta do is figure out how to ship it. Or you hop into a category that you're not very, very familiar with, and as a result, it seems like you'll be good, but it just always ends up turning out that whenever we make that kind of decision, we always end up having to backtrack and go, dang it, I should have just stuck with what I'm doing all the time. I feel like I've ran that boat many, many times throughout my reselling career.
Yeah, that's a good point. It almost seems counterintuitive, right? And I've had this debate with reselling friends not in the group, that they don't understand the niching down concept. They're like, I want to get everything I can get, but there's an opportunity cost, which they talk about on the next page. And you can't build a business like that. So let's just say you pick up the bike. I mean, what is the time suck? Well, first of all, you're going to have to figure out how to store it. Assuming you don't know anything about bikes because it's not in your niche, well, then you're going to have to spend time to research it. You're going to have to test it out and make sure it's in operating condition. If it's not, you're going to have to take it somewhere or get it tuned up. And, you list it, assuming you sell it, then, oh my God, I can't even imagine the nightmare of shipping a bike. and you add all that time together, like how many, like in Isaiah's case, like how many shoes could he have listed in all those hours? And then if he gets a return on the bike, then it's even worse. He talks about the opportunity cost, which ties into like what Isaiah was talking about on page 21. He goes, it is very, because this is the crisis, right? You're running low, your bank account is running low, the balance is running low. And he says it's very easy to go from being a guy who rakes lawns to a guy who fixes chimneys because of the opportunity for quote unquote easy money with captive clients. The money may be easy, but what about the cost to do it all? Rakes and blowers for yard work are useless when working on roofs or chimneys. Now this guy needs ladders, roofing gear, bricks, and other materials. And most importantly, he needs the skills to complete the task, which means hiring skilled labor or going back to raking, gutter cleaning, roofing, and chimney school. Each new easy sell took Ernie further away from his vision for his lawn raking business. The survival trap promises fast wealth, but when we're caught up in it, we rarely think about the massive cost of opportunity. And most of the time, we can't discern profitable income from debt-generating income. Instead of being the world's best at one thing, mastering the process of delivering perfectly and super efficiently, we end up doing a greater variety of things and become less and less efficient at each step, while our business becomes more and more costly to run. And I think that just kind of sums it up perfectly. And I've talked about this, like when I went into clothing, I very quickly had this idea of, okay, let's scale it up and hire a bunch of VAs. And I wasn't an expert in clothing. And so I took on all these expenses, and looking back as I'm cleaning up those listings, they weren't the greatest listings being produced while my expenses were going up. And I think that that's going to be one of the main points of this book is because he references another book he's wrote, I think called The Toilet Paper Entrepreneur, of running a lean, efficient business. And the focus is to throw to like you want to increase your sales, your growth, but by doing that, your expenses increase. And if you're not real careful and you start venturing into other areas to make more capital, then those can really accelerate.
So Brian, I have a question, like a philosophical question for you about the same topic. Do you think that when we're doing this, that we are running away from a challenge or running towards opportunities? Because I feel like every time I've done this, it has been when like there was something about my main business model that was challenging. Maybe I wasn't making enough money. Maybe cleaning shoes felt too hard. Maybe the listing process was taking too long. And then you see someone else doing something that in your head, it seems easier. Like you see Jeff's post today where he's saying, yeah, I made 60,000 in 3 months selling Ridge wallets, right? And you go, okay, getting Ridge wallets doesn't sound that difficult. You know, if I can just get the same supplier as him or get a similar supplier, then, or maybe a different item, I could do something like what he's doing and make how much money he's making. And consequently, it always ends up blowing up. So do you think that's us running away from the challenge of building our business, or getting through that roadblock that we ran into with our main business? Or do you think it is running towards an opportunity?
Okay. Let's see. Carlin had her hand up. Did you want to speak on that, or you have something
I actually
else?
had something else to speak on, but yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, Isaiah. I mean, because I saw the same thing, and I do sell replenishables on Facebook Marketplace, and that's like a side business that's on an addition to, and I've had that kind of like the whole time. Actually, that was running before I was doing pre-owned clothing. you know, I mean, it seems like the grass is always greener, right? We see someone being successful and it seems easier. But then what's the opportunity cost? Because you're not gonna, like, I don't think Jeff, you know, in a very short period of time went to from zero to where he's at now. So
I think we all have like a tendency to compare, and yet like everyone's situation is completely different. Where we live, our storage situation, cash situation, how long our experience, our knowledge, whether we have kids or not that are, you know, in the mix, and pets, and like whether we have a full-time job, part-time job, doing this full-time, doing it part-time. And I think like it gets so dangerous when you start, you know, playing the comparison game and you think, well, if that person, you know, and I think like for me, I don't love clothing. Like I've thought about doing other things, but then like I'm 3 years into doing clothing and I know this niche enough that I'm like starting to get momentum. So if I just started, you know, learning about purses, then, you know, it's going to distract me from learning about clothing and listing clothing and getting like making more money. So I think the more squirrel brain that you have, you just end up wasting a lot of money because, you know, then you have all the stuff that you don't want to list, and then that's, or you don't know how to list, or you don't have the setup to list it, or you don't have the setup to store it, or you don't have the setup to ship it, and then you end up just leaving it in a pile, and that's how death piles are created, which is kills your cash flow, which kills your business.
right. I like that word momentum. And while you were talking, it made me think of something like Tex talked about a PhD in hats or different things. And to earn a PhD, you know, you have to get your associates and your bachelor's and maybe your master's on the way. And there's a lot of time and knowledge invested into getting that expertise. So like, it makes me think, Isaiah, like right now, I don't know, where would you rate yourself on using the educational metaphor on shoes? Like, do you have a bachelor's yet or an associate's degree? So like wherever you're at, if you stopped and said, hey, I want to do Ridge wallets.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had to stop my timer. So right now, I think I'm like an expert. I'm well versed in shoes. So I'm probably like just got my bachelor's degree, like finished that senior year program, and now I'm like, you know, working on my master's. Like Chris talks about being in the top 1% of eBay, like being the top tier resellers, and like numbers wise, I reached that, but I don't feel like I'm not. I don't think I'm there processes wise. Like I've recently been thinking about, okay, tech was like, okay, everyone's saying that it's impossible to make $1 million a year, selling stuff solo. And I've been thinking like, okay, how could I do that with shoes? Is that actually possible with shoes? And in all honesty, it's likely impossible. It seems impossible. Like the complication of cleaning itself makes it much more difficult. Now, of course, you could get, you know, $1,000 $1,000 pair of shoes or something like that and get to $1 million in sales. However the numbers work out or whatever. But when it comes to my business model, which is focused on selling used shoes and my ASP and what my business looks like, what does that business look like when it's doing $1 million a year in sales? And it's selling 92 pairs of shoes a day, and it's listing 120 pairs of shoes per day. And even if I'm able to get the supply, how can I clean those shoes? How can I, like, just pulling 92 pairs of shoes per day? If you take 2 minutes to pull each shoe, it takes 3 hours just to pull them, not put them in the boxes, not add bubble wrap, none of that, just to pull them. So for me, I'm trying to upgrade all of my processes and become the best shoe cleaner, become the best photographer, become the best lister, so that, you know, I gain those systems and processes so I can become a doctor like tech is, you know. So I think there's a very, very, very long path for me to go, much further than I thought it was, because today I sent off 50 pairs of shoes and I spent 8 hours shipping, 8 hours shipping for 50. So like I have a very, very long way to go. I just got out the bachelor's program and we got a lot more work to do.
Yeah, but at that level, you'd have help. Like you'd have employees to help you.
I agree. I think that I could grab employees and, speed up the process. But I think the consequence of that would be I lose the ability to be an expert like how Tech is. Like he's a super expert in what he knows, and that's because he did it by himself for so long. Like when you are trying to do 120 a day by yourself, your processes have to be way tighter than they have to be if you were doing 40 a day and then you have 2 employees to do 40 with you. So there's 3 people doing 40. You don't have to have as tight of a process. But to do 120 solo, your process has to be so tight, you have to waste 0 seconds a day. And that's what I'm trying to get to. That's a level of expert knowledge that will put me in an entirely different place. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. How can I become the best shoe cleaner, the best photographer, and the best lister? Just like what I was mentioning with are we running away from the challenge or are we running towards the opportunity? The biggest challenge in shoes and why no one gets to that point solo is because it takes too long to clean them. Everyone gets out of the shoe game because it takes too long to clean them or it takes too long to list them. And I'm trying to figure out what are the solutions to that problem.
Well, okay, just in that very specific thing, because I know we've talked about this a lot. Like, are you open-minded to maybe look at things differently? Because you talked about how long it took to ship and to clean shoes. So are you willing to consider it may not be necessary to spend that much time cleaning? I don't know the answer, but there are things to at least consider. Tech?
I was going to say, is it an expert in knowledge of the category or is an expert in not wasting time? Because you just stopped your timer, and every time you stop your timer, you're never going to get there. You could be the best expert in the world, but if you're not an expert in time management, you're never going to get there.
That's also incredibly true.
Yeah, which we could go back to the one thing now. I mean, of course, you're working right now during the book call, and I mean, so we don't know what your one thing is right now. Obviously, I called on you, so that puts you on the spot. But like, I guess Gary Keller would say, if my one thing right now is to list, then I'm not going to let anything get in the way. Just just playing devil's advocate. But because yeah, those are. Sorry. Go ahead, Ted.
The time is there to do it. If you do 25 pictures an hour, that's 1 every 2 minutes. 4 hours of taking photos, 4 hours of listing, that's 100 per day. So that's 8 hours. If it takes you 2 hours to ship, that's a 12-hour day. You go out and source for another 2 hours. You can easily do by yourself in a 14-hour day, 10 hours of leisure after that, if you don't screw around. If you want to have totally maximized, blow it out of the park, one-man show numbers.
That's what I'm talking about right there. Like that 14 hours or 12, 14 hours of just like super dedicated work, and I'm not there yet. And that's largely because of like there's areas where I need to, we're talking about this with the last book, even if Revisited, where like in order to get to that point, I have to grow as an individual so that I'm wasting a lot less time. Like after I did my 8 hours of shipping, I was honestly exhausted. Like I didn't have anything. Well, I had stuff left in the tank. I'm taking photos now, but I was super, super tired. And that's because of the consequences of setting myself up yesterday to be successful today. But still, like there's more that I need to be able to do before I can, get to that point. Like today made me realize there's a massive gap between like Tech at 120 a day and me currently. There's a huge gap there. And as a result, like I need to tighten up every single process I have in order to actually get there.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So look this up. There's a cognitive bias called Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Which means that most human beings, this is scientifically proven, and they won like a Nobel Peace Prize for this, which states that human beings are really bad at actually looking at something and says, okay, am I capable of doing this or not capable of doing this? Especially amateurs, right? So that's the difference between a professional and an amateur. So look it up. There's a test that's been done. And so if you look at just the index, it just really means that people will actually say, oh, I can do this, without looking at their individual skill sets on what they can execute, right? Versus if you look at a seasoned individual, they can look at like even chess, basketball. Like I'll use basketball, for example, because I was supposed to play like D2 and college ball and stuff like that. There's a massive gap in skill sets between someone who plays collegiate, got a scholarship, and even D2 in high school. It's a massive gap. And I'll even add on the side of massive gap between like female soccer players versus male soccer players, right? They'll be like, oh yeah, we should be treated equal and paid equally, or, you know, WNBA and NBA players. Massive gap difference. And people can argue as well, they do the same sports, so they should be the same pay. No, massive gap difference. And you can't even compare the two. And so when we look at like skill set, I think internally what Tech does, or even Chris does, right, is not in the same stratosphere for most folks, you know. And the one, if you have never made that income before, that's just challenging because you just don't know how it feels like to manage that. And then the rest of the managing people. So that's that, like, look that up. It's called Dunning-Kruger effect. So if you're a science person, you want to actually, you know, fact check stuff, go look that up. And then that should be an eye opener and be like, oh yeah, you know, I thought I can do it. Maybe shit, man, I'm just overly ambitious, right? Like, yeah, this is a wish list versus a goal list, you know? So that's my 2 cents on that.
I
How
definitely
do
agree
you
with that.
spell? Oh,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
was
No,
just
you go ahead.
asking him how he spells it. Dunning. How do you spell the name?
Probably you're asking a guy that can barely spell, so I'm a bad person. You shouldn't ask me anything about spelling or grammar, because I'll get the
Right.
verb, adjectives, and even the there, to all mixed up. So don't don't ask me that. Yeah, I'm bad at spelling.
Okay, thank you. Tech just gave the. But I think, I'm sorry, Isaiah. I just want to say a little something about that. I think that's what I need to look it up, but I think that's where I got with the shows too, because I also wanted to focus on shows because the ASP is higher, but then the time it takes to clean them, like Isaiah was saying, it takes so much time. And I have 2 little babies, and I will buy shoes, like the cost will be so good. Like right now in my trunk, I have a lot of boots that I bought last week, great price. The sell-through rate is good, and it's Uggs boots, so they will sell. But I haven't even been gotten the time to take them inside of the house to clean them, let alone start taking pictures and list them and all that. And I have sweaters that I've been able to list because it doesn't take that long. You know, it's just like, okay, even if at night I haven't been able to do it because I had a hectic day with the kids. At 10 p.m., I can tell myself, no, I have to get my listings up, and I'll just grab 10 items, take the pictures, put the listings up before I go to bed. I cannot do that with shoes. I cannot do that with boots. So I'm kind of re-evaluating everything right now, just so I don't put so I can. I mean, I have to be honest with myself. That's a good goal, but is it a realistic goal, like you were saying? Is it something that would be nice to be able to do, or is it something that I can actually do?
Jeff, I have a question. So is there an inverse to that? Because for me personally, I'm hyper focused on my goal. So the idea of even learning chess, automatic no. Like I don't have the time to do it. Or the idea of practicing to become a D2 basketball player, automatic no.
Yeah, because I think that the opposite is not being the average, right? So the Dunning-Kruger effect is really like, another simplest way to put it is you ask someone that is like, are you hardworking or lazy, right? Usually in the bell curve, someone that is really genuinely hardworking always believes that they're not working hard enough. And then you ask someone that's actually, like, you watch them work and they'll be like, I'm a hard worker, and they're lazy as fuck. Right. And so when you're hiring people, you can actually look at that. And that's what I've come to realize. Right. And so it's the ability to say, okay, I'm not going to do that. So it's more of a mission, right? Like having a mission and saying, okay, I'm not going to do this because this ain't my thing, is a skill in itself. Just like saying, okay, my abilities, I don't have this, so I'm not going to even try, you know? Another piece that people can look up, and I might have said this before, which is about sales and marketing. There's a guy named Gary Halbert. He's considered like the godfather of copywriting, and he wrote a piece back in the days, like after like the '08 crash, that like changed my life. And the story goes, it's called like I might not sound PC, but it's called the Albino Little Man or Albino Midget. And it tells the story about how, you know, someone that's a little person and then they're albino can practice all their life to try to make it to the NBA. But physically, if we look at that, you and I and everyone will be like, hey, by the way, you ain't never going to make it to the NBA. And then he goes on and tells a story and says, instead, if he'd have changed his career to go to the circus, then he would make an absolute killing. And he tells that story. And so during '08, for me, that was impactful because the business world just completely changed. And I just knew that I had to change something, right? And so just sharing that kind of on what Tech was saying about like, okay, he was never going to learn that. I'm the same way. Like, I'm just not, for the most stuff, I won't, you know. I think I put on like a recent post that I cut new with tags, right? Like I literally cut everything on it. And then people will be like, you know, like literally everyone will be like, you're nuts, Jeff. Why would you do that? It's because it doesn't fit in the thing that I'm doing right now. Later on, I'll probably leave it on, but it doesn't. Why? Because I just want to wash everything. I don't want to have that thing on the side. So I'm going to cut every darn new tag, and I don't really care. I'm not even going to attempt to put it back on. I don't really, you know, care, you know, and just put it through the system, you know? And so from the outside world, that would be like, that's nuts. That's stupid. Like, you know, when you look at that transaction, but it doesn't fit in the thing I'm trying to build, you know? And so I don't even know if that's helping or not, but that's all I got, man. I'll shut up.
I have one thing to add. So I think with, sorry, I had a brain fart. Just with what Tech was saying about, you know, he's hyper-focused. I think Chris has talked about how many usable hours that we have in a day. And I think it's very few people can sustain the number of hours that it would require to list the amount that Tech lists. And I think, you know, obviously he's refined his processes, but like for me, living with chronic pain, living with chronic fatigue, living with, you know, other things, like I don't have the choice to have 12 hours a day of sustained like physical, you know, energy. I max out at 3-4 hours, if that. And I have to take breaks. I have to eat well. I have to get my sleep. Like, and I think it's very easy to say, well, I have 24 hours in a day, but like time versus energy, are those 24 hours usable? You know, and if you've got little kids that are running around taking up all of your energy, you know, I know there's lots of parents in the group that do it with kids, but you know, if you're in school all day and you have to take care of your kids and then you have to, you know, like, it's not that you can't do it still, but like the energy that you're going to have to give to reselling at the end of the day, even after like going to work all day, is not going to be the same as somebody who's doing it full time, you know, all day. And I think Chris had said in one video, I'm not sure if it was a YouTube video or it was a podcast, but he said it was like 4 hours a day was about as much that he could sit straight and list, because, you know, your brain just kind of goes kaplooey. And especially like if you have ADD, like I cannot sit for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Well, I can usually sit for like 2 or 3, but like probably at 3, I'm maxed out. Like I need to go do something else. I need to go. And that's why I love reselling, because, you know, there's so many different tasks. I can switch tasks. And, but yeah, I don't think like, it's just really, it's really easy to say, oh, you have X number of hours in the day, but like, are they actually usable as far as your energy goes?
Speaking of metaphors, like I like the one that Chris uses this a lot, like comparing reselling to running. And I also like how Tech preaches slow grow. Like it's really tempting to see what's possible and go from nothing and say, hey, I want to do 50 a day, 100 a day. But you wouldn't start never running and then enter a marathon your first week or your first month. Like you've got to go through a process. You've got to get where you've got to start walking, and then you've got to get where you can run a quarter of a mile, then half a mile, then a mile, and then work on a 5K and just 10K, half marathon, marathon. Like it takes time. And I think for a lot of us, it's tempting to try to speed that up. And currently I'm just adding one new listing a week. Like got rid of everybody and it's just me. And I started at 20, like, well, I guess 7 weeks ago. And this week I'm at 27. And that's not a lot, but I did my Monday shipping and I did all my eBay shipping and the other platforms. And I got 27 listings up and 6 drafts up, and I was finished by 4, which for me was fast. So what I'm seeing with the slow grow method, your efficiency increases. You just get faster and it feels easier. It's almost like you get more time. So I think it's easy to rush too quickly, where we just got to be okay with a slow grow and see where we're at in 6 months or a year. Tech?
I just want to add and reinforce a point that you said earlier. The Brian of a year ago, who was a generalist, could never accomplish that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I was talking to a reseller friend, not in the group, and a year ago, he was making, because we shared everything, he was making more than me. He actually encouraged me to, to list, I think, like 5 a day, right when I was going into clothing. And I wasn't efficient. I was going to auctions and garage sales and storage units, and maybe I was grossing 5K a month. But since joining the group and just switching to clothing, like, I'm 3.5 times that right now. And my days feel so much easier. And I hadn't really thought about like where I was a year ago. Like, it's funny, like I'm so forward focusing. Like, I'm like, where do I want to be in a week, a month, a year? But that might be a good point, is to take time and actually celebrate those small victories. Like, where have we came from, and feel good about that.
Yeah, if you guys wouldn't mind, I wouldn't mind just sharing my story about how this book changed my life. I didn't start reselling with any business background. I'd done like some things here and there, but nothing, like as on this scale. And I just got to a point where I was burned out. I was working pretty part-time, and I was reinvesting back in, and I was buying more inventory, but I didn't have my niches kind of like figured out. And so I didn't have the knowledge. And so a lot of the stuff that I bought ended up being donated back, because it was like, well, it's not worth listing, or I just ended up with a big death pile, because it was like stuff that needed to be hand washed, stuff that was new tags that need to be steamed, stuff like Jeff said, like you end up with all these little piles. Like I had like hats and just random stuff, like a pile of shoes. I had a pile of, I don't even know, I had so many piles. So I really got stuck. I was like, I had a cash eating monster business, and what was happening was I was putting my inventory on credit, and then I was not getting it listed, and I was, totally draining. And I wasn't getting it listed. It was just taking up so much, like causing me so much stress. And then, because I wanted to avoid the piles, what did I do? I went thrifting. So, and I live about 5 minutes away from the Goodwill bin, so you can imagine how that went. But I ended up with, at one point I had about 500 items unlisted. Now I had stocked up because of COVID, but I also just went crazy at the bins. And I ended up putting a lot of it on credit. And then I had to play this catch-up game of selling things for way too cheap. And I got rid of a lot of stuff. I donated stuff back, and I just had no money. Like I was constantly in that cycle of like trying to play catch up, and I was so stressed out. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. And I don't remember how I came across this book, but I've read it probably at least 3 times already. And I implemented it, and within like a week, I was so much less stressed, because I knew like I had an emergency fund. I had, so the one thing I wanted to say, which is kind of like, kind of the foundation of Profit First, is that you pay yourself first. And it's kind of like the envelope method, but like for your business. So say you get $1,000. So his percentages are 30% operating expenses, 50% owner's pay, 15% taxes, and 5% profit, which is your emergency fund, essentially. So if you don't take that money and you don't allocate it to where it needs to go, then at the end of the month, we use all of that money because we see it in our bank account and we go, oh, I got $1,000 in my account, I'm gonna go thrifting. And then you realize that you have bills coming out and you don't have the money for it. So and he really talks a lot in the book about paying yourself well and how you're the most important person in your business. And I was not doing that for the longest time. And I was and I wasn't, but because my original goal was to pay myself $200 a month, and that was it, just to pay for my car insurance. So I did that, but then I was trying to grow, but I just kept getting more and more and more expenses. And of course, the more that sales I had, then I needed tape, then I needed poly mailers, then I needed, shipping supplies. And I'm in Canada, we don't have free supplies. So everyone's always like, get free supplies. I'm like, Elish. But anyway, after a few months of doing Profit First, I had several $100s in my profit account. I had my tax account, and what I was doing was I was using whatever money was left for my inventory, and I listed my death pile, which really, really helped my cash flow. And since then, I am so narrowed in on what I'm buying, and I'm not buying stuff that I know I won't get to. I'm not buying like these crazy, I used to buy everything that was like beaded, that needed hand washing. Like, why? Like, just stuff that couldn't go in the washer. I would like it, it's just I've completely eliminated the piles. And the stress that it eliminates when you know where your money's going, you have money to pay yourself. And like, I got off the bandwagon, and about like this week I just decided, like, okay, I need to get back on the bandwagon. And I did my budget so that I'm doing profit. And yeah, it just really changed my life. And if you follow, I don't think you need to have all the bank accounts that he suggests, which I know is later on, so sorry, but just having an account for your inventory, that was like the biggest difference for me. Because like, I know, okay, if I have $500 in there, then when I go thrifting, I can only debit from that $500, and that's my limit. So you just automatically set yourself a budget, and then hopefully you don't have a death pile, because that's really kills your cash flow. So anyway, that's my story. That's my little thing. And yeah.
Well,
Sorry for
thanks.
talking for so long.
No, it's fine. Thanks for sharing. And it's good to know that, like, I've only read the first 3 chapters, so it's good to see that it actually works. And we can lean on you for some concepts maybe if we don't understand.
The thing that I didn't understand, and I am starting to fully understand, is how your expenses balloon, and if you let them. And honestly, I've done a million different budgets, and it's really, really hard to keep keep that 30%, because especially here, like my storage unit, a 10 by 10 was $316 a month. So like my storage cost was just ridiculous. Like a 10 by 20 is like $450 a month to start, and then it goes up from there. So that, and then cost of goods is obviously something that you can manipulate. And what was happening was I was being so cheap with my cost of goods that I was picking stuff up at the bins for $1.50, but then it wasn't stuff that was selling for a lot of money. It wasn't stuff that was selling quickly. It was just junk. And I get a few home runs here and there, but otherwise it was just stuff that wasn't desirable. And so I kind of switched my business model to pay more, but then I was flipping things for like 50, 60, 70, 80. They were flipping faster, and I was getting that cash flow, but then I was paying $8, $9 an item. And, then obviously that, and I just think it's so easy with reselling to have, okay, so there's a lady named Cindy Thomason. She has a book called Profit First for it's for like e-commerce. I haven't read it, but I've watched a lot of her talks on YouTube, and she works with a lot of people who do Amazon, FBA, and that kind of stuff. And she said to have an inventory account, and then when you sell an item, put whatever you paid for the item. So if you paid $5 for the item, put that back into your inventory account, so that when you because you kind of need to be ahead on your inventory, right? Like you can't just, you need to buy the inventory before you need to list it. So you need to be ahead on that. But for me, like I was just always like, okay, like I'm reinvesting in my business and I'm going to buy more inventory. But if it's not good inventory, you're really just wasting your money. And then like you don't have the money that you need for other things. So you have to be super, super, super dialed in on what is going to sell for you, what you like to list, what like what about, and make sure that you're making good decisions. Because if that stuff is going to go sit in a pile, it's not going to make you any money, and you're better off leaving it. And trust me, it is so hard to leave. Like I get it. There's stuff that I pick up at the bins that I'm like, I haven't been to the bins in a long time, because I would just pick up new tag stuff that was like Walmart stuff that I'm like, it's new tags, but it's Walmart. Like, why? Just don't do it. But I think you just have to realize that like the bigger you get, if you don't keep your expenses in line with that income, then you're never going to be able to pay yourself what you actually deserve. And that's like, you have to pay your taxes. If you do 5% profit, that's easy to do. And so it's really that your expenses are what is going to impact the amount that you're able to pay yourself. So, if you're okay taking, 40% and having 40% expenses, then that's fine. I mean, if you're making $20,000 a month and you're going to take, $8,000 a month for your salary, and that's fine. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But like when you're just starting and you only got a couple grand per month, like it's just so important to pay yourself properly. And if you just, yes, you need to reinvest, because obviously the more inventory you have, then the more sales you're going to have, the more money you're going to make. But it also can be really detrimental to your cash, and if you're not getting that stuff listed. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for, giving real life scenarios of how that might look. Excuse me. Well, so before we get to the profit first, he talks about GAAP, which is the traditional accounting, which is sales minus expense equals profit. And he admits it's very logical, but then he points out 3 flaws on page 26 with this, because going with human nature. And the first one, GAP's fundamental flaw is it goes against human nature. No matter how much income we generate, we will always find a way to spend it, all of it. He says everything is justified, everything is necessary. And I know for myself, I've been guilty of this. Like I've been too quick to, buy the big, what do you call it, photo box, the camera, like whatever. And as I'm reading this, and well, I've kind of realized this even before this book, but I'm like, okay. And well, a lot of it's tech when he talked about his process of his lean process. Like we don't need all those tricks. He says the second flaw is that GAP teaches us to focus on sales and expenses first. And he also says what gets measured gets done. And GAP has us increase sales first. It's the top line after all, and therefore we sell like mad while expenses are treated like a necessary evil to support more sales, which is what I've always thought. And then the third flaw, he says, another problem with GAP is it is overwhelmingly complex. You need to hire an accountant to get it right. And when you ask the accountant details about GAP, he is likely to get confused. The systems change and is up for interpretation. And we can play games with GAP, move numbers around, et cetera, et cetera. So those were kind of the 3 flaws that he pointed out. And he closed this first chapter with an ending of Frankenstein, kind of pulling it back to the beginning of the analogy of your business to the monster that Dr. Frankenstein created, which it wasn't his idea for it to be a monster. It was supposed to be a great creation, but it obviously got out of control, like our businesses can if we're not careful. And he ends it on page 28. He goes, never forget the power of your monster. You just have to understand how to direct and control it. And at the end of each chapter, he has a little action step. And step one was to draw a line in the sand, basically saying, okay, enough's enough. And then the second action step was no complaints about the past, to let it go. You can't change the past. So just say you're not going to do it anymore, and let's focus on what's coming forward. All right, chapter 2, how Profit First works. Gosh, he uses this, he uses a lot of metaphors and analogies. On page 32, he says, let's see. He was talking about like, oh yeah, he was stressed out, and he couldn't sleep because of all the debt he was in. And so he was watching infomercials and a lot of diet infomercials. And then he saw one related to that. And he says, the Clean Your Plate Club was instilled in me, and probably in you too. The message is ingrained. Changing that habit for a day is a no-brainer, but changing it permanently, that's hard. Someone say it's nearly impossible. This is why so many people who get diet gain, who go on diets, gain the weight back. Why people rarely follow through on New Year's resolutions past the end of January, and why it's so difficult to be disciplined with spending. As I continued to watch the program, the expert went on to say that rather than work to change our eating everything on the plate behavior, we simply need to change the size of the plate. And he says the solution is not to try to change your ingrained habits, which is really hard to pull off and nearly impossible to sustain, but instead to change the structure around us and leverage those habits. It was then that I realized every penny my company made was going onto one plate, and I was gobbling it all up, using every last scrap to operate my business. Every dollar that came in went into one account, my operating account, and I was eating it all. And when I read that, it makes me think of all the other books that we've talked about habits and leveraging an environment, how all these, I think that's a really good metaphor. You know, instead of changing the habit of eating everything on your plate, just make a smaller plate.
How would you apply that to reselling? Like, how does that translate into reselling? Making or using smaller plates to lose weight?
So, well, and I think Carlin probably knows better, but like she was talking about how like different accounts, like maybe you got different plates. Maybe you have a small plate or you have a plate for your profit. You have a different plate for your expenses, and feel free to jump in, Carlin.
Yeah, so I think that analogy would be, you take, like, say you made $2,000, then you take that $2,000 and you take 30% of that as your operating expenses, and you shove that into a different account. And then if you know, you can put some of that away into your inventory account, so that, you know, if you're not going to use a credit card, if you have $500 in that inventory account and you go thrifting, that's it. There's no credit, because if you go past your budget, you know, then you're going to need to get more sales. And part of Profit First that I really love is the way that he talks about how we always expect that the sales will catch up. But it doesn't always work that way, because yes, you buy things now and you sell it later and you get that money back. But then, like I said, your other expenses go up, your storage expenses, your bags you're buying to bag stuff, you know, poly mailers, shipping supplies. If you're going to buy it, like, then your equipment, like you're going to upgrade to a photography tent, you're going to upgrade your steamer, you're going to upgrade your printer, you're going to upgrade, and it all, like, Brian said, like it always feels necessary. It always feels like, well, I need this for my business. But it gets to a point where you're just creating that cash eating monster, where then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't have enough money to buy my inventory. And you're counting on those future sales. And he goes over somebody's numbers, this lady's numbers for her business in the book, and explains it better than I can. But just that we work hard, and this idea that someday it's going to catch up. And if you're not careful, you just end up working for nothing. So if your expenses are constantly 80% of what you're bringing in, then unless you're in grow mode, I do think that this doesn't necessarily apply when you're in grow mode, because if you have a full-time job and you're gonna put, all of the extra money, keep it in the business for a year or two, and you're just gonna grow your inventory, I don't think it necessarily applies as much, because 30% obviously would be very like stifling. But if you're trying to run your business and, but then on the same token, it's like, if you're not already allocating those percentages, then like, if you're used to spending 80% of your income or your sales on inventory, on storage, on whatever, you won't just magically be able to bring that down to 30% to pay yourself. So it is a tricky balance. And that's why he says to start from the beginning. It's more of a habit to get into of allocating that money than it is necessarily about the numbers. But yeah, like we always think that, well, if I buy 100 pieces, then like later on down the road, then that will turn into $800 or whatever you want to say. But what if half that doesn't sell? What if it doesn't sell within a year? What if it doesn't sell, or what if you find out 10 pieces are damaged? Like, you missed a flaw and you don't want to sell it. Like, there are so many things on the back end. What if a customer scams you? Like, it's just, what if you have to refund them? Like, you can't expect that 100% of that is going to be a return. So that's kind of where for a long time, like, I just always assumed like, well, of course this is going to sell. But I was like so new that I didn't have the knowledge, and now I know how to check comps properly and check the sell-through rate. So when I buy something, I'm like 98% confident, okay, this is gonna sell. There's 11 listed and there's 4 listed, 11 have sold. This is gonna sell in a month or two. But if you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what to buy, then a lot of it does end up in a death pile.
I think, I can speak for myself on this one. And I think the other factor, like, I was just focused on growing a big store, and I used to price at high comps. I'm like, well, if someone else could get this, why can't I? I have good pictures. I have all these good reasons. But like, I've shifted over the past couple of months to pricing it to sell, like what Tech says, get some of the money all the time versus all the money some of the time. And if you're really looking at each of those expenses and revenue and everything, you want that cash flow to come in, even if you're taking a little bit less profit than a high comp. So I think it seems like from the beginning, just like from a macro perspective, is that you're really looking at everything really tightly. And like, I know he says profit first, so you're going to pay yourself first. And that quote I'll put on page 34, he says, how does he know it works? And he gives the example of 401ks, where you pay yourself first if you have a 401k with a company, and hopefully it's getting matched. But regardless, you pay yourself first, and over time that compound interest is going to grow. So he goes on, and I think he's continuing the diet industry analogy to the business. He talks about things you want to use small plates, which I think now I have to listen to you, Carlin. I'm kind of inferring here that those smaller plates are probably the different categories. And the way you explain it, like, I went through Financial Peace University that Dave Ramsey sponsors, and it sounds exactly like he's taken a lot of those concepts and put it into a business format, which makes sense if it's going to work for your personal finances. Because Dave Ramsey, like if anybody doesn't know, like when he was younger, he made millions of dollars, but his spending was so out of whack that he was bankrupt, and kind of like the author, you know, crying, and he was crying in the shower, even though he had made millions through real estate. And then he can, you know, he actually went through the Bible and came up with these concepts and this plan and whatnot. Number 2, serve sequentially. He talks about eat the vegetables rich in nutrients and vitamins first. If you leave them to eat last, you will rarely finish your vegetables. They'll just sit there piled up on the side of the plate. So like the order that you're going to you're going to spend your money. Number 3 is to remove temptation, which I know if we go back to, was it Atomic Habits, they talk about the environment. Like if your habit is, you know, to eat healthy or to not, let's just say, be very specific. I'm going to go 66 days without eating any sugar, no sodas or no candy. Well, I know personally because, you know, with Halloween, we have trick-or-treaters and we have leftover candy and there's Reese's in there, which is not good for me because I love them. And like I'll eat a healthy lunch. I'll do my bulletproof coffee. My lunch is good. But at the end of the day, where I'm kind of tired from all the decision making, like today, you know, I could have, but I didn't resist it. So I got some Reese's, and that's remove the temptation. I even told my wife, I'm like, we got to get this out of here, because if that wasn't here, I couldn't have reached and grabbed it. So we have to remove those temptations and thinking about them in terms of our business. Like Carlin, you were talking about using credit cards. So maybe that is
I cut mine up.
Yeah, cut them up. Maybe you cut those up and you put that inventory account into a checking or even a cash system. I don't know, however you want to do it, where you only have that amount.
That once I did that, I was so picky what I picked up. I want to make sure 100% this is going to sell. It's going to sell fast. It's going to be a good flip. And it really helped my sourcing.
So it's like it's forcing you to make better decisions, just like with eating, right? Like if I don't have the Reese's there, well, I'll probably grab some mixed nuts or something that's going to be a better food choice, and that's going to, you know, not lead to cravings and help me think better. And then the 4th thing he says, enforce a rhythm. He talks about doing your payables twice a month, specifically on the 10th and 25th. Don't pay only when money is piled up in the accounts. Get into a rhythm of paying bills twice a month so you can see how cash accumulates and where the money really goes. I know for me, like I do this weekly. That's part of, I've been doing it on Thursday. Like after I do my shipping, I open up GoDaddy and make sure everything's categorized and pay any credit cards or whatnot that need to be paid. So I think having a rhythm and a system, which we talk about that a lot. Like I know, Tech, you always talk about, you know exactly what you're going to be doing at a certain time. And that's the direction I've been moving towards. And it's kind of funny, like there's freedom and, well, I say the term discipline, but it's really habits. Like you need discipline to create a habit. And once that habit's ingrained, it happens naturally and it's easy. And it's getting to the point, like I was talking to a friend today, and he was, you know, talking about doing something else. I'm like, no, I've got to get this stuff done. And like I couldn't imagine, it would have to be something, a really big emergency or something out of left field for me to mess up my schedule right now. But you also schedule in your free time, like what Tech was talking about, the 14 hours, then you got your 10 hours of free time or whatever your setup is. Like for me, the free time is on the nights and I have it built into the weekend. All right, at the end of chapter 2, he talks about action steps. He says, set up small plates with your bank. You will need 4 accounts: a profit account, owner's pay account, tax account, operating expenses account. He says you probably already have a couple. He just kind of goes through all that, but you can read through that. Then step 2 is to set up 2 or more external savings accounts for daily so basically he's just like, you're creating these different accounts for these different expenses or uses of your money, where it's forcing you versus just it's all on one plate, right? The big plate where you're not being disciplined with that big plate. All right, the last chapter for tonight is the Naked Truth, chapter 3. Let me see, I'm just kind of looking through it. Okay. Now, okay, so he starts this chapter and he's talking about whenever there's entrepreneurs, this question always comes up, how big is it, right? And this is in reference to your revenue. And we do this in the group, right? Like we'll post our 90 days or 30 days or year over year. And that goes back to the revenue. But he says that doesn't give you a complete picture. A better question would be like, how healthy is your business, right? Like what is your actual profit after all of this? Excuse me. So that's like the health versus the revenue. And on page 43, in the middle, he said, as I said in the introduction to the Pumpkin Plan, I stand by my method for growing niche-dominated businesses that lead to giant success. And I'm always kind of gravitated towards these concepts that we've either already talked about or that we talk about a lot in the group, or that Tech has kind of directed. He says, but we can't sustain that growth or enjoy the fruits of our labors if we keep putting profit at the bottom of our to-do list. Are you really going to keep struggling as you wait for that one big sell, that one big contract, that one big payoff? And once again, when I read that, it made me think, is that why so many people are stressed about their daily sales? Is it that we're operating out of, paycheck to paycheck or daily sales to daily sales? Because if you're operating with this profit first mentality, or just a leaner operation naturally, if you could do that naturally, then you would have money put aside and you wouldn't be stressed if you had a low sales day, I don't think. Got an itchy throat. And then he goes through the instant assessment, which, to be honest, I don't know, that it seemed like too much for me, but on page 44 all the way through 49, he goes through this process of this instant assessment. I know, like, personally, I use GoDaddy bookkeeping, and I switched at the beginning of this year, and oh my gosh, it's personally saved me so much time, because it does a lot of this where you can look at your revenue, all your different categories of expenses. But apparently there's an assessment you can do there. And I'm gonna be honest, like, I kind of looked through it, but I didn't fully understand it. And I don't know, I just didn't feel like digging into it. So I don't know if anybody else, this is the part that, if anybody that wants to speak on that, but I want to talk about this because Isaiah was talking about employees, and he has this section of how do I determine these numbers and percentages. And he talks about different companies or businesses at different stages of revenue. He talks about when a company is doing less than 250,000 in revenue, it typically has one employee. You are the key employee and usually the only employee, with some contractors, part-timers, or maybe possibly one full-timer. Many freelancers are at this stage, and if they elect to stay there, just them and no employees, they should be able to increase the profit and pay percentages even more than what I have listed. I guess that's what you were talking about, Carlin, like the percentage you're paying to yourself, the profit first, because they don't have the expense of employees. And I know Tech has preached this a lot, like how he stayed by himself and grew it up to 160 for a little bit, I believe, Tech. And so he stayed at, if you stay at that stage, you're going to have more profit because you have fewer expenses. And then the next business level was like the 250 to 500K, you likely have employees, basic systems will be necessary, like a CRM for your team, equipment, et cetera. Plus you will need to pay your people. So operating expenses increase, owner pay adjusts down, and will continue to as you take your first step in being a little less employee and a little more stakeholder. When other people start to do the work and get the benefit of the profits via your distributions. Then the next one's the 500K to 1 million. The growth trend, I can't talk, and patterns continue with more systems and more people focusing on increasing profits because for so many businesses, the growth from 1 million to 5 million is the hardest. You want a little reserve. And then the next one's from 1 million to 5 million. Systems are no longer added because they are nice to have. Now systems have become absolutely mandatory. You can't keep it all in your head anymore. Often the biggest investments into the business needs to happen at this time, as all the knowledge in your head needs to be converted to systems and processes and checklists. This means larger allocations must be put toward operating expenses. This is when you are no longer doing most of the work. This is when, if your business is to grow, a significant portion of your time is spent working on the business, not in it. And the rest of your time is spent selling the big projects. Then he has the 5 to 10 million. This is typically a management team enters the company, brings it to the next stage. The founder starts more and more to focus on her special strengths. And then you got the 10 to 50 million. A business will often stabilize and achieve predictable growth. The founder's income is almost entirely made up of profit distributions. Owner salaries are relative to the rows, but typically are insignificant. Businesses of this size can leverage efficiency in big ways to maximize profitability. So I'd like to kind of looking at like the different levels. And the biggest thing that stood out to me is like, if you're under 250K, you probably shouldn't have an employee, maybe like a contractor. Like I have one person that'll source for me. But pretty much you should be doing all the work yourself. And then you could kind of see the different levels and what that may look like for the business. The next section is the rude awakening. Apparently this guy's written a lot of books. He references the toilet paper entrepreneur, the foundation of which was a series of principles I used to start my businesses. Chief among them was frugality. I wholeheartedly believe that any entrepreneur could start a business with little or no seed money and grow that business no matter what they had in the bank. That book is full of tips for saving money while launching and running a business. And he made it his mission to get what I needed for my business on the cheap and took pride in doing so. So he really focused on cutting expenses, slashing expenses, looking at things that are wants versus needs. He talked about how he didn't really need an office space at that time, and he had like slashed from a $5,000 a month office space to a $1,000 a month office space, but his bottom numbers still were where they wanted to be. And then he realized he wanted an office space, but he didn't really need an office space. He said on page 54, I cut line items across the board until I stopped the bleeding and watched my business and profit grow. Cutting cost has become almost enjoyable. It has become strategic in a way. How can I achieve the same or better with less or no cost? And then he kind of ends it, well, what if you're starting and you're brand new, your business is brand new? And he talks about the importance of getting these habits from the get-go. And then the action steps for that one, the one and only step is to complete the instant assessment on your business. Do it now. And that's kind of the first 3 chapters. All right, I know I kind of blew through chapter 3. Is any thoughts on that last chapter, or the instant assessment, which I didn't actually do? kind of my takeaway, or the thing I like, the big takeaway from all 3 chapters for me was tighten the ship, right? And I'm kind of already doing the profit first, because when I went full time, I knew I had to take X amount that had to go into the household income. So that kind of forced, in a way, the profit first. So I have to make X amount, and I've realized that that expenses, like to, I don't know, that you need to be as frugal as you can and really focus on cutting those to get that profit where you need it.
Yeah, I was watching this video last night on YouTube. It was actually a personal finance video about someone who had her husband had lost his job, and this lady was going over their budget. Sorry. And she basically said, so we need to find out if this is a spending problem or if this is an income problem. And so she was going line by line by line of their budget and seeing what they could cut. And then at the end of, after she's cut everything, they still were short like $1,000 a month or whatever it was. So she said, okay, now you have an income problem. You need to, obviously, you know, your husband needs to find some work and yada, yada, yada. She was, the wife was already working 2 jobs. So she was like, your husband needs to find something, you know, sell stuff around the house, whatever. And it really just reminded me about like your business and how, you know, if you cut your expenses, you can only cut your expenses so much, because then you're gonna, like I said, you're gonna sacrifice the quality of your inventory. And like, if you're in a position where you know, if you get any more inventory, you're gonna need more storage, and that's gonna be an expense, or something like that, then you need to really focus on getting that net profit per item up and your sell-through rate up. And that's what I've been focusing on the last few months. And it's definitely really helped, as I've had some like really good $50, $60, $70 flips within like I had a couple sales within like a week, a few days, a month. And because I'm basically maxed out on storage. So it's like, if I don't want to pay, you know, $300 a month, then I have to, you know, get that net profit per item up. So I think, you know, you have to focus on bringing in that income and that revenue. Sorry, my kitten she jumped off the my husband has a chair, and like the part where you put your feet and then it's like rocking like that. She just flew off there and it's broken, so hopefully she's okay. But yeah, like if you cut to a certain, you can only cut so much till you really just have to be better at sourcing.
Yeah, and I think like there's a lot of factors, like in your case where storage is expensive, so you're going to need inventory, either like you said, inventory that's going to sell quickly and hopefully for good profit. But you definitely want a quick sell-through rate if your storage is very expensive. Like for me in Texas, it's not that expensive. But even with that being said, like I now am thinking in terms of I want things to flip quicker, even if it's not for maximum profit, because you know, if I'm getting things for $1, $2, $3, I mean, even if it just sells, now depending on what it is, like I'm, you know, within reason, but like if it's a basic mall brand, if I'm getting it for $1 or $2, and if I can sell it for 10 or 15 plus shipping, and I have the offer, and I just need to take it, and that's what I've been doing. Like I'm more aggressively trying to turn over that inventory. I don't know, like you said, you can control you're looking at the revenue and the expenses. And if you can increase the revenue while decreasing your expenses, then you're in even a better situation. And yeah, Michelle, I agree, like the GoDaddy, it's really nice. It's easy to use once you get it set up. It just links to your your credit cards, your bank accounts, and it will auto categorize different expenses and transactions into the correct categories. Because I was doing, gosh, up until this year, I was doing line by line accounting, and I was spending so much time on that. The amount of time I wasted with that, it's almost embarrassing. But all right, anybody got anything else tonight? All right, well, thanks for everyone coming out. And I think the way to look at this is like, what's something you can take away? Like, each person is going to view each book a little differently. And like, some people are probably going to follow this, you know, step by step and get great results, but you may already be doing this or something similar, but I'm sure everybody can get something. Like, for me, it's this idea of like, I like what he said of making frugality a game, like how, you know, how much can we cut? All right, next week, yes, this book is 12 chapters, so I figure 3 chapters a week. So next week we'll do 4, 5, and 6. And if you're thinking out a little bit further, I forget who, maybe it was Catherine on the morning call. She brought up a fiction book, The Midnight Library, which was kind of serendipitous because I was actually listening to that on audio tape, like when I go walking or running. And even though it's fiction, I love this quote. This is from Neil Gaiman, that he says, fiction is the lie that tells the truth. And there are some valuable lessons you can learn from fiction also. So I know most of the books we'll be doing here will be nonfiction business books, but if you're planning ahead, we're going to do that one. Maybe we'll only spend a week or two once we get there on the Midnight Library. Chris has read it also. There's some philosophical and life decisions we can talk about. All right, everybody, thanks for coming out, and have a good night, and we'll see y'all tomorrow.